Starting, all attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning and welcome to the Mekko Graphics webinar training. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us this morning. We're going to give you the tools that will empower you to use Mekko Graphics. This webinar is going to focus on how to create compelling charts that highlight insights for management, colleagues, or clients. And this webinar is jam-packed with information. So we're going to be spending the majority of our time creating charts and highlighting the major features of the product. I'll be doing this training using the latest version of Mekko Graphics. So for those of you with an active subscription, it is a free download. To get the latest version, you would just hop on our website and you would click the download button right here. Also, I'll be using Office 2013 for this training. If you have a question during the training, please send them on the Q&A tab of the webinar. That way we'll keep moving along and get through all of the prepared content. We do have someone monitoring those questions and we'll try and answer them as they come in. At the end of the webinar, if there's any questions that didn't get answered or that we thought might be helpful to share with a wider audience, we will address them then. And if I don't get to all the questions, or if the questions are more specific to a client situation, I'll respond privately. All right. So let's get started. We're going to start out with our marimekko chart. This is a marimekko chart. It's also known as a market map. A marimekko can be described as a variable width 100% stacked bar chart. So on this chart, we're showing the package delivery market. And the focus of the chart is FedEx, as you can see in the byline. How does FedEx compare across regions against other package delivering companies? And so as you can see here that we kept FedEx on the bottom so you can do the comparison, and we'll be showing you how to do that. The way this webinar is structured, we're going to be doing a lot of things repetitively, so that the idea is that by the end of the webinar, you will have a lot of the basics very solidified. In each chart that we create, we'll also be introducing some new concepts as well. All right, so let's go ahead and create this chart. You have a Mekko Graphics, you have actually two Mekko Graphics tabs in PowerPoint, Mekko Graphics Charts and Mekko Graphics Tools. And in Mekko Graphics Charts, you have these quick launch options, which allow you to insert all of the different supported Mekko Graphics charts. There are split buttons. If you click on the top half of the button, it inserts the sort of default chart type for that category. But if you click the bottom arrow, you'll see a lot of different subtypes for each sort of major category of chart. And creating a Mekko Graphics chart is always done in 3 steps, at least 3 steps. So the first step is getting your data into Mekko Graphics, right? The second is, how do you want that data to appear in the chart? And then the third is formatting the chart itself. So step 1, how do we get our data into Mekko Graphics? Well, there's a variety of ways. We could type in the data, and I can show you that. We can copy and paste data from an Excel spreadsheet, or we can actually create the chart directly from Excel. So in this first example, we will be copying and pasting the data from an Excel spreadsheet. So the first thing we're going to do is just go ahead and insert a marimekko chart. So I just go to this Mekko Graphics chart menu and choose the default option, which is marimekko. And it inserts my chart with sort of dummy data or pre-populated data. When you insert a chart, the data editor for Mekko Graphics opens automatically. It looks like Excel. It's actually not Excel, but it looks a lot like Excel. It acts like Excel. And it has my dummy data. Now, if I want to replace it with my own data, I'm going to just go to Excel. And I'm going to, I have here a spreadsheet with multiple worksheets with my data, because if I typed it all in during this webinar, it would be a 4-hour webinar. So I'm going to just go ahead and copy this range. I'm going to flip back over to PowerPoint, to Mekko Graphics, and I'm just going to paste this into my Mekko Graphics data editor. Okay. And I'll go ahead and close my data editor. Just in terms of the structure, before I close it, just in terms of the structure, it's very similar to any chart you might create in Excel. Series are represented as data rows, and bars are represented as columns. Not every cell needs to be populated, right? So if, for example, TNT didn't have a presence in, say, Asia Pacific, that would be blank. All right, so we're going to go ahead and close this data. If we wanted to see the data and the chart at the same time, we can certainly do that by moving things around or docking it. But we're going to go ahead for now and just close the data. You can see that the chart is created from the data automatically. And once you are in Mekko Graphics, you'll see that you now have in PowerPoint an Edit Chart toolbar. And this has here all of the options that you'll need to use Mekko Graphics. So the first thing we want to do, once we got our data into the data sheet, that was step 1, check. The second thing was we want to determine how do we want this data to appear in our chart. So in order to do that, we're going to click on the Bars and Series button. And the first thing we're going to do is let's sort our data. There's 3 tabs here, Series, Bars, and Sort. We're going to go to let's go to the Bars tab, and we'll go to the Sort first. And for Bars, we're going to sort as widest on left. And you can see that it automatically adjusts. And then for series, we also want to sort it as biggest on bottom. Now, you might have remembered that I wanted FedEx to appear on the bottom regardless of my sort. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to define an exception or an exclusion to my sorting rule. And I'm going to do that here through the Series tab. If I go here to the first sub-tab and I choose FedEx, I can say, you know what, for FedEx, I don't really want it sorted. I want it to always appear on the bottom regardless of my sort. So I'm going here to sort order here, and I'm just creating an exclusion to my sorting rule and saying, regardless of my sort, I want FedEx on the bottom no matter what. While I'm here, I might want to put other on my top, which is other package delivering companies that might be included in my data. Okay. So we'll go ahead and close this task pane, close this window, and now we can see that my data is now sorted. And I'll go to step 3 of my 3 steps, which is formatting the chart itself. To do that, I just click on Chart. Opens up this window here on the right, and this is my home base for all of my formatting options that impact the entire chart. So one of the things that I want to do, I'll go to the the general tab, which is the first tab, is that I don't really need to show my bar totals for this particular chart. I don't want to see them. So I'm just going to uncheck that visibility checkbox for show bar totals. And then what I also want to do is, in addition to seeing the series here, I also want to see my values. So I have a couple of different options here. I can say show the series and the value, and the calculated percentage, or any combination of those three. So I'm just going to check show values as well. And now I can see my values in that chart as well. And now I'm going to hop over to the Values tab. And if you can have a favorite tab in Mekko Graphics, this would be my favorite tab in Mekko Graphics, because in this tab I can do all of my number formatting in one place. So it's the place where you can do all of your number formatting for any kind of type of label that is on your chart in one place. So for here, what I want to do is I want to show my grand total here in some kind of units or currency as well. So I'm going to click on grand total, which is the sum of my bar totals, by the way. And I'm going to say I want to see this in, let's say, euros and in billions of euros. Okay. And then the last thing I want to do is maybe just a little bit of sort of housekeeping cleanup. These labels are very small. You may or may not like them in their sort of home segment. If you don't, you can always click on any label in any chart and just sort of nudge it a little bit. I'm just using my mouse to click and drag. Nudging is a technical term. And you can move them anywhere that feels right. You can also, for any label, right-click and do any kind of sort of standard formatting, changing the color, changing the size, the font typeface, applying attributes, things like that. We'll go over some of these that are less intuitive later in the webinar. Okay. And then it has an annotation line to its home segment. You can turn that on or off depending on what you want to do. All right, so we're going to click off this chart, or we could choose Close Chart Editor, which would do the same thing, but just clicking in the white space of your slide will also just close your chart. And there's your marimekko. Great. So we're going to move on to our next chart type. And again, don't worry if I'm going fast for now, and if you're a brand new user, you're going to see a lot of repetitive steps. You're also going to see some new stuff. And I should have mentioned this webinar is being recorded currently, and this recording will be available to you on our website. You also should have a copy of this deck. You can also get a copy of my data, and so hopefully that will help ease your mind. All right, the next chart type is the one that my colleague says this is the chart type that you should be using, but maybe you're not. This is called a bar Mekko chart, and there's tons of use cases for a bar Mekko chart. Basically, it's a variable width, variable height bar chart. And what you can see here is that in this market, that the small competitors are shrinking and the large are growing. And if I showed you this chart as sort of a standard bar chart, in other words, like a fixed width bar chart that you're used to seeing, the follow-on question would be, so what, right? Because you wouldn't be able to see how big is Apple above all others, for example. Right? So we wouldn't know that all others is actually a really large percentage of the total market. And therefore, it's actually pretty significant that it's declining. But in this bar Mekko, we see all others represents 41% of the market, which is declining, which is a pretty big percentage of the overall market. And this chart also shows market share as a data row, which is representing the width of the bar, and it's considered a best practice. We actually have a post on our website, a blog post called Why You Should Use a Bar Mekko. So encourage you to check it out to kind of get an idea of why this chart is such a powerful and effective chart. Let's go ahead and create our Bar Mekko. Remember our 3 steps. Step 1, how do I get my data into Mekko Graphics? Right? Well, this time, instead of copying my data and pasting it in, I'm actually going to create my chart directly from my Excel range here. So here's my data, and you might have noticed that there's a Mekko Graphics tab in Excel as well. And then over here on the left, there are 2 buttons, Chart in Excel or Chart in PowerPoint. So meaning that I can create a chart right now from this data, I can pop it into PowerPoint, or I can drop it right into Excel itself. So now I'm saying I want to put it in PowerPoint. What is the chart that I want to create? Bar Mekko. And I'm going to just click on Bar Mekko. Before I do that though, I just want to talk a little bit about the data structure again. You'll notice that my bar width, which is the market share, is actually a row in my data. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell Mekko Graphics, please don't plot that row in my chart itself, but use that row to define my bar width. Okay, so just an FYI that when you're talking about the row that the data that's defining your bar width, it's actually just a row in your data. And you can define any row to be your bar width. So I chose Bar Mekko. I get this cute little cursor that looks like an adorable little Mekko Graphics chart. Anywhere I left click will drop that chart into PowerPoint. Okay, so there's my chart. It's got a green border. Why does it have a green border? It has a green border because it's telling you that this chart is linked or is coming from data in Excel, and that the data that's in Excel and the data that's right now in Mekko Graphics is exactly the same. It would turn red if I were to then change my data in PowerPoint so that it doesn't match my Excel data that it came from. Okay, and we'll talk a lot more about that later on in the webinar. But now my data is in Mekko Graphics. If you don't believe me, or if you want to see, you can click Chart Data here in my Edit Chart toolbar, or I can always just double click on the white space and that will also open up my data. But let's click on Chart Data. Here's my data editor, and here's my data dropped in from my Excel range. Okay, so step 1 is done. Step 2, how do I want my data to appear in the chart? Click on Bars and Series, as we did last time. And in this window, we are going to go to the Bars tab and the Options sub-tab, and we're going to say, I want to define my bar width here. And what do I want to define it as? Market share, right? So this is going to give you a drop-down of all of the rows in your data. We're choosing market share. Also, while I'm here, let's sort. I'm going to go to my Sort tab and say I want to see the highest on the left for my bars. And then in my series task pane, remember when I said the best practice is to pull your bar width down and show it as a data row underneath your chart? You do that here. So for market share, you can see it's not being shown on the chart because Mekko Graphics knows it's being defined as the bar width. But I can also say that I want to include it as a data row by checking this checkbox here for data. And then I can also, on the fly, just format it here and say, make that data row a %. Okay, let's close this and see. Oh, that's looking better. I've got my data row defined. I've got my data row listed down here at the bottom. Now what I want to do is I want to go to step 3 of my 3-step process, and I want to format my chart. So I'll click on Chart. And first, the General tab. Don't need to see my grand total. It's not really valuable for this chart. I'm going to uncheck that. By the way, if you don't do that, if you just want to use the delete key, that's also just select it and click the delete key, and that will also work. Just another way to do it. Now these labels here, we already know we only have one series, right, in a bar Mekko, so we don't need this label on every bar. So we can go ahead and hide our labels. So in this General tab, I'm going to choose the radio button for Hide All. Okay. And then also, we're going to talk a lot more about color later on, but if I want, I have a number of different options for my sort of coloring mode. We're going to color this by bar so that it's not taking the color the same. We're going to actually make the palette, the draw order, be by bars so that every bar is a different color. And now we're going to go to my favorite tab, the Values tab. And we're going to, I want my bar totals and my axis values to actually be percentages, not decimals. So using my control key to multi-select, right, I'm going to select bar totals and then hold down my control key and select my axis and just say, could you show those as percentages, which it did. I also need to tell the user, I need to tell people what this Y axis is talking about, right? So I'm going to just right click on my axis to get a context menu for axis title. And this is year-over-year growth. You might have noticed that as soon as I did that, the Format Axis window kind of showed up here on the right. If I wanted to do more sophisticated formatting on my axis, I have a lot of options here. They're pretty self-explanatory. We're not going to go over all of those today, but know that there's an axis task pane to do all that. All right. I think this is in good shape. Let's just click off. And there's my chart. Great. So this next chart is a cascade chart, also called a waterfall chart sometimes, or a change cascade, because it's walking people through the individual components of change. So which products had the biggest impact on revenue from quarter to quarter for those time periods? Well, clearly in this chart, it's the iPhone, right? It's the biggest contributor to growth in 2014 to 2015, right? It's also the biggest contributor to decline in this quarter from 2015 to 2016. So clearly it's the iPhone that's the biggest contributor. Nothing matters but the iPhone, but we knew that, right? It's the biggest contributor in both ways. We also have this bar comparison line to show the overall percentage change from Q3 2014 to Q3 2016. And we have an axis break here, which we'll talk about as well. All right, so let's go ahead and create this cascade. All right, again, we're going to create this right from Excel. Here's my data. Now, a little bit about the data structure. Right now, I'm creating a simple cascade, which is a single series with multiple bars, right? So one row. However, I could create a stacked cascade, right? Which is a little bit more jazzy, because it could be multiple series. Right now, we're just going to create a simple cascade. So in Excel, I'm just going to go to my quick launch and create a simple cascade. Hops me over, gives me my cute little Mekko Graphics icon. I click, and it inserts a cascade here, which is green bordered. First thing I want to do, okay, I've gotten my data right. I've gotten my data in. Second thing, what was step 2? How does my data want to appear in the chart? Bars and series. First thing I want to do in this chart is I want to actually set my total columns. Which ones are my totals in this chart? So I'm going to do that here in the bars tab. Right? Which ones are going to go down to 0 on the y-axis? So the ones that I want to go down to 0 are my Q3 and for 2015 and my Q3 for 2016. The first one you can choose, it's already going to be at 0 because it's the first bar, but you could choose that as well. And we will go ahead and close this screen. And now you can see, looks a little bit better. Now the total bars here are absolutely dominating the chart, right? We really don't care about all this stuff. We care about these little tiny changes, which are hard to see because the total bars are dominating the real estate on this chart. So this is a good example of when you might want to try inserting an axis break. So where you click matters with an axis break. You can insert an axis break by right-clicking where you want it to be. So let's say I want it sort of right here. I'll go ahead and insert axis break. Okay, so now I can see my individual components of change a little bit more clearly. I've got a few options here. If I click on this break, I can resize it. I'm clicking my mouse and dragging it, and you can see if you hover the parameters of the break. That's pretty good, right? I also can change the style, so I have a couple different options. Excuse me one second. I have a couple different options for the format of my break. I just can, sometimes people like the squiggly, other times people like the little slanty thing. So there's my axis break. Okay. And so that's pretty good. I've gotten to step 2 there. I've added my totals. By the way, on a cascade, you can also right-click any bar to make it a total. You don't have to open up that task pane. You can just right-click and you have the option of showing a bar as a total. And then you can also designate which one it's considering the previous cascade bar. In this case, we're doing a very simple one, but you do have that option if you want to get more sophisticated. Okay, so step 3 of our 3-step process is formatting the chart itself. We're going to click on Chart, and we're going to do a couple of things here. In the General tab, one of the things that we want to do, and a lot of times it is done in a cascade, is we're going to hide the y-axis because since we have the bar totals, it's a little bit redundant. So we're going to go ahead and hide that. Okay. In the Values tab, in my favorite little tab of Mekko Graphics, a new thing I want to talk about. So when you look at this chart, you have several digits of detail. But I want to see this data in billions of dollars, right? So this happens all the time, right? You know, you get data from some other source. It's in a weird format, right? And when you translate it into a chart, it's not that intuitive, right? So I could go back to my data sheet and convert all of my data into billions, but that's introducing a huge margin of error, right? Or propensity to make a mistake. I don't want to have to do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to scale my data here. So in the Values tab, there's this option called Data Scale. And this is one of the biggest time savers that people don't know to use. Okay, so tips and tricks. This is one of my big tips is use this data scale, because all I have to do is say, okay, right now my numbers are shown as maybe millions in my data sheet. I want to show it in billions. So I'm going to just increase this to 3. Right? And then I'm just going to say that I want, whoop, hold on one second. I'm doing this to the wrong thing. Hold on. My webinar screen is in my way. There we go. I just did the wrong thing. Let's undo. By the way, you have an undo in Mekko Graphics. Great. So I want to show, whoops, one more undo. There we go. I actually want to show my bar totals in billions of dollars. There we go. And I actually want to add a decimal place as well. Or maybe 2. There we go. So now, without having to change my data, I can make this chart much more understandable in units that make sense. Okay, last thing I want to do is I want to highlight the iPhone. The iPhone is reinforcing my tagline message about the importance of the iPhone in this chart. So I can use color to highlight or reinforce my tagline message. So for iPhone, I'm going to just click on that segment. I'm going to use my control button to multi-select and click on the other iPhone segment. I can then just change my color. I can also do it on the right click, by the way, but I can change my color here to some highlight color, right? Which is now just reinforcing my message. And then the last thing I wanted to do with this chart is show a bar comparison line. So I'm going to go to this insert, and this allows me to insert all kinds of different lines that highlight or reinforce the message of your chart. So I'd like to do, I'm going to insert a bar comparison line. There we go. And then I can pick up that line as with any line, and I can move it. I can change which bars it's resting on. Right now, I just want to do first to last. And you might have noticed that as soon as I did that, it gave me a formatting window here on the right that allows me to do all kinds of different formatting options for that line. And then the last thing I want to do is let's go back to my chart task pane, is I want to just link my segments together. And so I'm just going to go back to the insert button here, and I can choose to just draw little comparison lines to link my bars together as well. Before I click off this chart, I want to just highlight one other thing. I can show margins on any chart by clicking here, this Show Hide Margins button. And anything that has a handle, just like in, like PowerPoint, I can move, right? So right now, I might want to I'm like sort of looking at this chart thinking it looks a little bit crowded. I might want to just give it a little bit more room here. Like so. And I just wanted to kind of show you that you can definitely adjust margins, internal margins in your chart. So you might want to use this if, like, say you're going to have a legend, you might want to make room for your legend. But if you don't have a legend, you might want to make sure that you're using all the real estate that you can. All right, and we're just going to click off this chart. Now, what happens if the data changes in my chart, right? I created this chart from an Excel range. What happens when that data changes in Excel? Okay, so let's take a look at the Excel Link Manager. I'm back in PowerPoint. I'm in my Mekko Graphics Charts tab. I'm going to open up the Excel Link Manager. Okay, Excel Link Manager is sort of like a control panel for all the linked charts in your deck, right? So right now we've got two of them. The one we're talking about right now is slide 7. It says, what's it linked to? So it's giving you the path of where your Excel file is. It's giving you the name of the range it's linked to. It's giving you the last time it was touched. It's telling you that it's currently synced, right? And then there's this button here, Auto. If I want my chart to update automatically when my Excel data changes, I would click this button. We never check this by default because we don't want people to accidentally have their chart changed. We want you to be very intentional about checking this button if this is what you want to do. So it's always unchecked by default. If you want to check it, right, you would check it. And now, let's close this. Let's say I were to change my data. So I'll go here, back to my data, and I'll make this change. We'll just make it bigger, right? I pop back over to PowerPoint. And without me having to open the chart, without me having to do anything, my data changed automatically. Here it is. Okay. If you don't want that to happen, don't check the auto. Okay. And if you were to then change your data in Excel, if you were going to change your data in Mekko Graphics, the border that is always green that says what's in Excel and what's in PowerPoint are the same, it would be red. And it would just say, FYI, the data that's in Excel that this is linked to is somehow different than the data that is in the Mekko Graphics data sheet, and you may or may not want that. Okay? I know that piece is a little bit confusing, so we always get questions on this, always. So I want to just mention that we have a video, we have a couple of videos actually online that go through Link to Excel, automatically updating, things like that. Anything kind of related to this piece of Mekko Graphics, we have videos on that, and I don't want to spend all the time on that here, but I would refer you to that if you have a lot of questions on this particular aspect of our software. Okay, great. Moving on. This is another chart preferred by strategy professionals, right? This is a bubble chart. it's showing two different variables that measure technology use. And you can see here that it's comparing developed countries in Asia to emerging countries in Asia. The country size is represented by the size of the bubble. And then you have a reference bubble, which is the bubble that all of these other bubbles reference for size. Okay, let's go ahead and create this bubble chart. Again, we're going to go to our quick launch here and just go ahead and insert a bubble. We could have done this from Excel. I'm just mixing it up. As soon as you insert a chart, your data opens, right? I'm going to hop over to Excel and I'm going to just copy my data. Before I do that, let's just talk a little bit about the structure. It's very different. You've got your series label, you've got your X and your Y coordinate, and then you have your relative bubble size. And then you also have an optional column for group where it would basically affect how those bubbles are colored. So groups, it doesn't matter what you call it. You can call it something descriptive. You can use numbers, you can use letters, whatever. It just knows to distinguish unique groups by unique identifiers here. Okay, so we're just going to copy this range, flip over to Mekko Graphics, and paste it in. Okay. Yeah, so we've got two different groups here, 1 and 2. I'll go ahead and close my data. And it's going to color by group. If I didn't have groups, each bubble would be a different color. But since I have groups, it's going to color by group. And actually in this chart, everything's kind of where I want it. So I've done step 1, but I don't really need to do step 2 because there's nothing, it's pretty much good the way it is. So we're going to hop right over to step 3, which is formatting the chart itself. All right. So in step 3, maybe one thing I'd like to do in a bubble chart is to add quadrant lines. So I can certainly do that. So here's a horizontal quadrant line and a vertical quadrant line. If I want to change the style of the quadrant line or anything else for that matter, I know we haven't gone to this tab yet, but the style tab will allow you to, change the style and color of lots of different elements on your chart, like borders and segment borders and axes and grid lines, and in this case quadrant lines, right? So I could actually change the color, the style, the width, pretty much anything here. Where do all those defaults come from? Stay tuned. We'll tell you. All right. So the next thing I want to do is I want to add my axes titles because I don't know what we're looking at. I don't know what we're talking about, right? So I'm going to actually click on axis here to open up the window for axis. I want you to see some of the features here. So I can add my title. The y-axis title is smartphone market penetration. Whoops, spelled it wrong. This is why I'm not typing a lot. My x-axis title is internet. Now for my y-axis, the axis values are always calculated depending on based on your data. You can always override that. So in this case, I want to actually make this axis scale manual and bring it all the way up to 1. I don't have to do that. I just am choosing to in this case, but I really just want to highlight to you that you can always overwrite the computed scale for your charts. by clicking manual and typing in your scale. Okay. I also want to call to your attention that in a bubble chart, we consider the reference bubble like a third axis. Okay, so if we click on reference bubble here, I want to title that, and what we're talking about here is actually population. Okay, and I can also, in this case, I want to say we're talking about millions. Okay, and we'll go ahead and click off this chart. Just a quick introduction to bubble charts. Okay, switching gears a little bit, I want to talk about some of the productivity boosters that we have in Mekko Graphics. Where do all those default values come from? The preference manager. So we're going to talk about the preference manager, which is where you choose all of your palettes, your draw orders and settings, defaults, things like that. The next productivity booster, which is new in this release, is the chart gallery. We now have an integrated chart gallery that allows you to easily reuse your charts and slides, find them. We've preloaded it with about 250 plus charts, and then you can add your charts to the gallery, tag them, and be able to find them. So it's a great repository, and you will no longer be spending time trying to find that chart that you used, 6 months ago or whatever. And then the third productivity booster is your slide tools, where we have some tools that just make life a little bit easier. We've got an ability to insert agenda slides now. You can add text boxes, header boxes, and value chains to a slide, Harvey balls, and then we have some more sophisticated alignment and formatting options for objects on your chart. And finally, you can also save, print, or send selected slides in your deck. All right, so let's go to the Preference Manager. Okay, we've just gone over probably the 4 most popular chart types for strategy consultants, right? The Marimekko, the Mekko, the Cascade, the Bubble. When we created those, we were leveraging Preference Manager settings that we've already selected, which are standard settings for all of our charts. Okay, so where do we do that? Let's take a look at the Preference Manager to see where do we control all the options for all the charts that we create. We do that here in the Mekko Graphics Charts tab. Open up the Preference Manager. All right, it's got 3 tabs. We're not going to go over all of the options here, just want to give you a taste. We're using this palette, okay? So themes or color palettes, Mekko Graphics comes with all of these standard palettes, and you can add your own palette or you can edit existing palettes. So let's say I want to add a new palette. If I click New, right, I can add new colors here. I can create a color, what is that, teal, whatever, teal. I can add a color, I can type in an RGB value, and then I can add it to my draw order and I can create lots of colors. I can also import colors from existing palettes or PowerPoint themes, so I can do that here. Then I can also create colors for my lines, for my lots of different types of elements in your chart. In fact, pretty much all the different types of elements in your chart. You can select default colors, and then also for your Gantt charts. So let me open up an existing one so that you can see this one, for example. All right, so here's one that's on our website. We've got lots of them on our website that you can download for free. This is one of them. You can see the draw order for lines. You can see the different colors for different elements in your chart for Gantt. And that's it. Okay. If you get charts from friends or colleagues or clients and you want to apply your colors to those charts, you can apply your preference manager settings to those charts, and I'll show you that as well. And you can do it for one chart, or you can update your entire deck. Okay? Great. So that's the preference manager. Additionally, I know I breezed through this one fast. I also want to call your attention that we do have a video on our website that goes into the preference manager in a whole lot more detail, and I would definitely refer you to that if you have a lot of questions. Actually, before I go, let me just open up the settings tab. I do want to talk a little bit about that one. Yeah. So for settings, a lot of these are self-explanatory. You can certainly set your default font type. You can set your orientation of your y-axis title, so whether it be horizontal, vertical, or aligned to the top tick of your y-axis. We have a sorting option, and people create their color palettes, and then they sort their data, and then their colors get all messed up, right? So if you don't want that to happen, have your draw order for all of your colors be applied after your sort, as opposed to before your sort. Okay, and then you can also have your coloring mode by bars or by segments for all of your preference manager color palettes. Okay. I want to talk briefly about font size here. If a lot of our clients call and say, I don't like that my charts have different font sizes for the labels. I want every one of my labels to be exactly the same size. That's great. You can do that. Just set your minimum, your maximum, and your minimum smart place values to the same number here, and they will all be consistent size. Okay, and then for Gantt charts, for line styles, you've got the ability to set the width and style for all different lines in your chart here. Again, these are setting all of your default values. And then for Gantt charts, which we haven't gone over yet, but we will, you have the ability to, you have a lot of different options here around font size, weekend days, what levels look like in your Gantt, and the layout of your Gantt, default layout of your Gantt, and then formatting the different elements in your Gantt chart as well. Okay. The third piece of your tools are adding, so you can add charts to a chart gallery. Okay, so this is a chart, and I can, let's say I want to reuse this chart, right? I want to add this to my gallery. So I'm going to go here to gallery, here in my Mekko Graphics charts. I'm going to, I can add the chart, the slide, or the entire presentation to my gallery. I just want to add the slide. So it's going to say, okay, you want to add the slide to your gallery? Where do you want to add it? Well, I'm going to add it to, let's say, this folder, new folder, right? And I create these folders. I can create a hierarchy or a library of organization for my gallery. I'm going to add this chart there. And now if I go to my gallery, and by doing that, I'm going to click the View button, right? Here's my whole gallery. A lot of these charts come pre-installed with Mekko Graphics. Okay, and now if I want to search, like this is a competitive analysis chart, right? So if I search on competitive analysis, it's going to give me all the charts that have a competitive analysis. How does it know? Because the preloaded charts in the gallery have been tagged. Okay, you can add your own tags. We have I don't even know how many, maybe 100 different tags that we've used, so that you can search on things. You can search for, say, all the marimekkos. You can search for, you can search by word. If a chart contains the word iPhone, for example, you can search on that. So everything is tagged in your chart gallery. You can add additional tags as well. And now I can see that I have this chart and I can add it into my deck. Or maybe I want to add, here's all of the competitive analysis charts. Let's say I want to add this chart to my deck, right? So I'll just right click and say, insert this slide. And it seems to be taking a while, but I think that that is due to the webinar software. There we go. Added it. Wow, that was a little slow. But it added the chart here to my deck, right? So let me just show you where those tags are. So if I were to open up a chart, let's say I open up this chart. And in my Edit Chart toolbar, I have my chart button, right? If I click the down arrow, I can see Properties. And this is where I would add my tags for charts. And tags are delineated by semicolon here. Okay. All right. Other tools that are available in terms of productivity boosters are, you can add an agenda slide. So if I were to add an agenda slide, let me just open up the tools. Let me close up my gallery here. Great. And I'm going to open up my, my tools window here. It gives me all of my options. Let's say I want to add an agenda. So it adds a slide with sort of pre-populated. I can then change my text, right? I can format it, and then if I click agenda again, it will propagate that agenda with the highlighted item propagating to the very next item. So if I click agenda again, whoops, that slipped. It will then go and it will propagate 2 more slides, right, with that formatting. And whatever formatting you apply will be propagated. Hope that makes sense. Okay, so that's agenda. We also have the ability to add value chains, text boxes. Here's some examples of value chains and text boxes that we can add. We just do that right through here, and you can say how many elements you want it to be. So in this case, it was 3. It was a text box with 3. In this case, it was a process with what looks like 6. And then you can just type them in. So they're pretty fast. And then additionally, you can add Harvey balls to your slide or to tables. Okay, so you can just add a ball and you can move it and put it anywhere you want, resize it, whatever. Okay, so those are some of the additional slide tools that we have to offer. We also have the ability to do a little bit more sophisticated alignment. So if you were to select multiple objects, charts, we have, and if you mouse over these, it'll tell you exactly what they are, aligning and distributing these objects as well. Okay. All right. Let's go back to go back to creating some of our charts. So this is Apple sales by product. This is a stacked bar chart that's showing the trend for Apple product sales, and it includes a CAGR column and a CAGR growth line. So in this chart, the main reason I want to show you this chart is I want to show you how to calculate the CAGR directly from your data sheet, right? Many people have told us that the CAGR formula is hard in Excel. So we have a simple formula that you can use in the Mekko Graphics data sheet. And we're going to add that CAGR calculation directly into our data sheet. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. We're going to jump over to PowerPoint, to Excel, excuse me. And here's our data. We're going to go ahead and create a stacked bar. Click my mouse to drop it in. Okay. And let's go ahead and open the data. I'm just double clicking in the white space. It opens up my data very easily. It's a pretty simple chart, but I want to add a CAGR. So I'm going to assign this last row as a CAGR. I can call it anything I want. Maybe I'll call it 2011 to 2015, right? That makes sense. And now here's my formula. So I do CAGR, right? My first parameter is my first value, comma, followed by my last value, comma, and then the third is the number of change years, which in this case is 4. And there's my CAGR, and then I can propagate that down to my other rows, right? And then the last thing I want to do is I just want to make sure that it knows that this is a CAGR, right? We don't want this to show up in the chart. We want it to be a CAGR. I can actually do this right on the right click, or I can do it in that bars and series pane if I want to, but I can just do it right here. I just want to show you that you can do it here. Set that bar as a data column, CAGR data column. My chart is red bordered. I'm sure you have figured out why, because we created this chart in Excel, but we added data to the data sheet. And so it's just an FYI. This data sheet is now different from what's in Excel because we added data to it. That's okay. Just wanted to point that out, that you can do that. If you, just a handy dandy tip, if you forget this formula, don't worry. First of all, you're getting this deck, but secondly, the quick launch chart called bar with growth line actually has the formula in it as well, so you will always have it in case you forget it. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is just go ahead and format this chart. I'm going to close my tools pane here just to give me a little bit more room. There we go. I want to go ahead and format my chart. So I'm going to click on chart. Now in this case, I want to show all my labels, right? Not just first bar. So I'm going to click the radio button here for show all. Beautiful. And I also want to, actually I don't really want to show my labels as much as I want to show my values, right? So I'm going to go ahead and choose just to show values. I don't even have to show labels because I'm going to add a legend, right? So let's just show values. That'll work. Or maybe we could show here, we'll go to values, we'll show this as a percent. That makes a little more sense, but look at that percent, that's crazy, right? So we want to go ahead and scale our data again. right? I want to convert this from thousands to millions without altering my data. So I'll just go ahead and change that to 3. Okay. And then I want to format it and say, well, what we're talking about here, we won't do it as a percent, we'll do it as millions of dollars. There. Okay. Next thing I want to do is I want to add a legend to this chart. So I'm just going to go ahead and in the Edit Chart task pane toolbar, add a legend. And one of the little tricks that we do have for any chart that has a CAGR and a legend, you can align your legend to the CAGR so people can easily see what series relate to which CAGR value. So I'm going to right click and choose Align to CAGR. I also could do it here because as soon as I added a legend, it knew I was, Mekko Graphics is smart that way. It knows what I want to do, and it gives me a task pane here on the right to do it. I have a lot of different options for formatting my legend. I can always pick up and move a legend. I can resize a legend, move it around. I can do whatever I want, and then it'll be a manual legend, or I can just say, no, go back to its default Align to CAGR position. We'll add a title to this chart. I'm just going to right click on my axis, my y-axis, and add my title. And then we'll add a couple of little enhancements. We'll add a CAGR growth line, right? So now under Insert, where I have all of my different kinds of lines that I can create, I can add a growth line, but there's 2 types. So let's insert a growth line here. This is just a regular growth line, but I can also say, make this growth line, instead of making it absolute, make it a CAGR. And then it'll show these bars as years and calculate the CAGR for your growth. Pretty quick and easy. That would be almost impossible to do in Excel or in PowerPoint alone. All right, so let's go ahead and click off this chart. Let's see. Okay. The next chart I want to do is a scatter chart. So this is a growth scatter chart type where it's comparing software categories. And we're going to just go ahead and insert a scatter. So that's part of the bubble family, but it's a scatter. And it looks very similar to a bubble in terms of its structure. The difference is the marker and regression grouping here, which is very similar to groups in a bubble chart, right? And then, of course, there's no reference bubble in a scatter chart. So let's just go ahead and copy this data from Excel. Whoops, get rid of that. There we go. So here's our data, and here's our scatter chart. Let me just take a look. That doesn't look great. Accidentally copied my header. I know what I did. I copied the wrong thing. Wow, that made no sense. There we go. Copied from the wrong range there. Okay, here's my data, much better. And again, the data structure is very similar to a bubble chart. X and Y coordinate and bubble size, or grouping. And if we go to, we can right click on a marker and we can format our markers to be bigger or different colors. And we also have the ability to add a regression line. So if I want to add a regression line to this chart, I'm going to go to step 2, which is going to series, format series. There's no bars in a scatter, but we'll go to series. And I can change my style of my markers here. I can also go ahead and, if I have groups, I can add regression lines. So if I add a regression line, I can see that here. And then it will also add regression line labels, and I don't need to see them if I don't want to, or I can show all or some of them. Anything I don't want on a chart, I'm just hitting my delete key. You can do that with any label. And then we'll go to format axis. The y-axis is profit growth. And the x-axis is revenue growth. Okay. And there's a scatter chart. Okay, we're getting down to the end of this webinar. I do want to show you quickly a Gantt chart. This is a Gantt chart showing a timeline for creating the webinar. And there are different steps, right? Our basic 3 steps don't apply to a Gantt chart. It's kind of a different animal. But the first thing we want to do here is step 1, you can think of as setting your calendar, right? So if I open up this chart, I apologize for the lag. The webinar software we have found does sometimes slow this down a little bit. But anyway, here it is. So here in our edit chart toolbar, we've got here a calendar, and we would set, this looks kind of like, when you book your vacation on Travelocity or Expedia, it looks like a calendar. It's pretty self-explanatory. You define your start and end dates for your calendar, and then you can for your header, you can show years, quarters, months, weeks, and days. In this case, I'm showing months, weeks, and days, and then there's different formats for showing those as well. And then the next step, step 2, would be inserting your tasks and your timeline elements. So your tasks are here. If I wanted to create a task, I could just add a task here. Here's my task. If I want to promote it or demote it in terms of where it is, I can hit my tab key to promote, or shift tab to demote, or I can add subtasks and things there. Let's see. I can also move tasks up and down by using I can do control down, for example. Like that, to move them up and down. If I want to add my different elements, my timeline elements. I have processes, brackets, lines, bars, all sorts of different things. I can add anything to my Gantt chart here. Here's a process. I can pick up any element, move it anywhere on the chart. If I right click an element, I can add my dates to, from, duration, start or end date. I also have formatting options here. I can add milestones, which are one-time events, like conduct the webinar, for example, would be a one-time event. Again, you can delete elements just by clicking your delete key. You can change your, sometimes I like to give a little bit more real estate to my timeline, so I can maybe do that a little bit. And there's a host of different options. This is one of the best things about the Gantt chart, is that there's a wide variety of formatting options that can change the look and feel of your Gantt. Okay. All right, so we've come to the end of the webinar. I know that there have been questions coming in that have been answered live. We are a little bit, I think we're 1 minute over our end time, and I don't want to take up any more time. So if you do have a question that wasn't answered, please email us privately. But in terms of resources, to learn more about sort of when to use different chart types, like when to use a marimekko or a bar mekko, you can click on these links and check out our blogs and video presentations, webinars, past webinars. We have sort of 5-minute videos on different things. So if you ended this webinar and you were like, didn't really understand axis breaks, or I want to see that piece again, we have a video on axis breaks. Or you want to learn more about the preference manager, we have a video on the preference manager, things like that, or link to Excel, things like that. So if there's a video you'd like to see you don't have, let us know, we'll make one. So also, if you need to contact us, if you have a support question, we do recommend that you use email support here in our Mekko Graphics charts tab here. Why? Because this will include a diagnostic file that helps us help you faster. We don't collect any information, don't worry. It just allows us, if you're getting an error message, or if you're having a hard time with something, this just gives us a lot of information that allows us to answer your questions a little bit faster and more efficiently and effectively. So we do ask that you use that. If there's a chart that you don't, if you have a task, you need to create a chart, you don't know how, you just need help sort of understanding what chart should I use, how do I do it, what's the best way to do it, click on Ask an Expert, and that will give us, that will connect you to an expert, a charting expert here. We're happy to help. You know, we like helping people make good charts. So please take advantage of that. That is free to our subscribers. Okay. So this ends our webinar about 3 minutes late. And I do want to thank you for attending, and I hope you have a good rest of your day. Take care.